I'm Georgina Fries. I own Bellwether Dry Goods Quilt Shop. We specialize in hand quilting other people's quilts. We've been in business for 31 years, and today I'll be presenting a talk to this guild on 9-patch quilts, and the topic is called the magical 9-patch, and I hope you'll enjoy all the quilts you see today.
So at this time I'd like to introduce Georgina Fries.
Hi, how are you? I'm glad to be here, even though it's not my Ocean City. Tell you a little bit about our business. We started 31 years ago as a quilt shop, and because we were out in the country, people weren't going to drive 15 miles to buy a quarter of a yard of fabric. So it evolved into a quilting service business, which has been going gangbusters now for all this time. In fact, we just finished one for one of your members. She's going to show it to you at the luncheon. All the quilts you see today are made by me, but they're hand quilted by one of our 125 Amish quilters all over the country. When I get a quilt from you, we talk about it, we look at it, and we discuss how you want it quilted. My husband, Dick, marks the quilt for you, and then it goes directly to the quilter to be hand quilted. We don't do any machine quilting at all. And any applique you see here today is done by Hmong ladies. I have several ladies in the Midwest, in Michigan and Wisconsin, and I don't know if you know much about the Hmong culture. These were the people who fought alongside our troops in Vietnam. They were the Cambodian refugees from Laos, and they were the mountain warriors. And they came to this country after Vietnam because if they didn't come here, they probably would have been slaughtered. And I've made some wonderful friends with these ladies. They are incredible needle women. Fairy stitches, just beautiful. Now, when we have a quilter write to us and want to do work for us, I really don't know what she can do. Sometimes they're wonderful, sometimes they're not so hot. So what we do, we send a block like this. I make the block, Dick marks it, we write specific directions on how it's to be quilted, and this becomes her resume. And if she does a nice job, I can trust her with one of your quilts or one of my own quilts. So we have these back there for sale, and it's just a little quilter sample. I first did this talk for the Annapolis Quilt Guild for their quilt show as a demonstration. And I was really gung-ho about it and thought I did a fairly good job. And this young woman came up to me after the talk and she said, "Could you explain one thing to me?" I said, "Sure." And she said, "What is a 9-patch?" And I went, so, this is a 9-patch. For those of you who are not experienced quilters. And my talk today is going to be about 9-patches, but they're not all going to look like that 9-patch. This is one of my antique quilt collections. It's one of a pair of quilts for twin beds. It was probably made in the 1930s, and it's just a wonderful collection of 1930s fabrics. This example is not so much 1930s, it's probably closer to 1900. But she's taken great care to get the 9 patches in color diagonal waves. And I think this one has a name on it, and wonderful when the name is on the quilt of who made it and when. And I think it's 1927, I think. Do we have it?
Yeah,
1929. So she was using probably fabrics over a 20-year period. She had a very nice stash of antique fabrics. Well, they weren't antique then, they were new for her. I'm going to pass some storyboards around for you to look at. I haven't made these quilts yet, I've just made the blocks, but the names of the blocks are on them. But they're just fun. Just some of them have staples on them, so be careful you don't stick yourself. All right, we're going to switch now to my own quilts that I've made I've seen quilts in shops, I've seen quilts at study groups. I'm very fortunate. I belong to 4 American quilt study groups in the Mid-Atlantic area, New Jersey, Virginia, and 2 in Maryland. And they are wonderful. One of your neighbors up in Salisbury started the one here on the Eastern Shore. And we meet in Denton every 3 months, had a lovely lunch at one of the restaurants, and then we see absolutely gorgeous antique quilts. And we've learned, all of us have learned so much about these quilts and just about our whole quilt culture. This is a variation of a 9-patch. This is, I call it an improved 9-patch, where you see the 9-patch, but then you add bars and cornerstones, and then that green becomes part of the sashing and setting block. And all the quilts that you see now are examples of my quilters' work, and they are wonderful. This one is an example of double 9-patch, where you have 5 9-patches in a 9-patch block. And they're set on point, and I've used all the reproduction Civil War fabrics in this one. And fortunately, I only had 1 bleeder. Here is your double 9-patch. Here's another example of a double 9-patch, but they're spread out because you have an alternate block that gives you some very pretty area to do some really nice quilting on it. And this one is all made with 1930s original fabrics. Most of our customers do like the work we do because we do like heavy quilting. That's what holds the quilt together, and that's why when you see a really old one that's been heavily quilted, that's the reason it's still in good shape. I had a member of the Annapolis Quilt Guild come up to me, and she said, "I've got a quilt I know you're going to love. I hate it, it's ugly, but you're going to love it." And I said, "Okay, well, let me take a look." And it was just a top. But it's all 1930s, and it's the block Puss in the Corner, which is a 9-patch variation. And it is kind of ugly, but... And I thought, oh, that's a great idea, but I'm going to make my blocks smaller. I love to reduce things to make them smaller. So here's my version in the 1930s fabric, but it's reduced to, I think, a 5-inch block maybe. And this is called Grandma's Aprons. This quilt's called Garden Party. And again, it's very, very simple. You have your 9 patches. You have your bars, which is actually 2 muslin and a green to form your bar, and then your alternate block. And that's what you get when you put it all together. Be a fun wedding quilt. I had a group of little 9 patches that I didn't like after I made them, so I threw them. The pinwheels. I had pinwheels, and I had a whole group of them, didn't care for them, threw them in a plastic bag and stuck them in the cupboard. And Dick found them, and he said, "What are you going to do with these?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't really care for them that much." He said, "I've got a great idea." He said, "Why don't we applique 9 patches over the pinwheels?" I said, "Well, we could do that." The trick is, though, after you applique that little 9 patch over the pinwheel, you need to cut away the back, because when you have a pinwheel, you have all those intersections of fabric coming together. You want to get rid of that thickness so that you don't have a lump. In one of my study groups, one of the girls had brought this wonderful antique crib quilt, and I just fell in love with it. And this is my interpretation of that little antique quilt. And it's hers. All the pinks and greens were all the same fabric, and I didn't have enough of any one, so I just made it scrappy. Here we've got the album block, but the alternate block is a 9 patch that's set with bars to make it as big as your album block. And that's all 1930s fabric too. Don't you love that plaid border? I'm sorry?
It's a plaid.
It's a plaid print, yeah. 2 summers ago, a group of us from this study group went into Washington to the Smithsonian. And they opened the stacks for us so we could see the quilts that everybody else doesn't see. And it was such a wonderful day. The quilts we saw were just fabulous. And to be able to be that close to history, it was amazing. And we were very fortunate because the 2 docents that day were members of the Annapolis Quilt Guild, so they really pulled out all the stops. And I fell in love with the quilt here. I'm going to pass it around so you can see the original. She opened one of the drawers, and this quilt was just calling my name. And so this is my rendition of that antique quilt in one of the drawers at the Smithsonian. And on this one, in the original quilt, every alternate block had a different quilt pattern design in it. And so I did the same thing on this one. And that's just a little pinwheel double 9 patch. This is a fun block to make. It's a split 9 patch. This is a very popular block or quilt that was made in eastern Pennsylvania in the Allentown, Bethlehem area, and it was called the Perkiomen Valley quilt. Here are 2 examples of that quilt. This is the block right here. And you play with the blocks like you would a log cabin block. And you could arrange it in streaks of lightning or, all sorts of different ways. This happens to be the most prevalent in eastern Pennsylvania, though. And if you go to, there are a couple wonderful museums. One is the Schwenkfelder Museum in Pennsville, and the other one is the Goscherhoppen, very German. My friend that lived here in Salisbury was a collector of antique quilts, and she really loved the quilts from eastern Pennsylvania. And the very popular quilt was the Rolling Stone. And they were signature quilts that they had a German fractor sign. So each of these center blocks would have a wonderful, beautifully calligraphied signature. And I decided I wanted to make one for me, and this is my own quilt, never to be sold. And they're friends from all over the country who have visited me either at quilt shows or members of the guild. I'm sure Mary's on there somewhere. But it was just a really fun quilt to do, and it's a treasure to me because I would guess there are already 15 people on there that have gone. So at least I have their name. Yeah, but this block makes up beautifully. I had another one, but unfortunately it's sold, but in really soft colors. You don't have to do those strong, colors. You can do something really soft. When my first grandson was born, I decided I had to make him a quilt, a special quilt that he would not get until he either I died or he got married. And so I was telling him about this quilt as a young man, and he said, "Grandma, you got to change the name of those quilts. When I die quilts just doesn't do it." And I said, "What would you call it then?" He said, "How about legacy quilts?" So each of my grandchildren has a legacy quilt now. Let's do Lila's. I've used the 9 patch as your cornerstones or setting blocks. This was a quilt originally from the 1930s. It was the top. And the woman had done all these beautiful Dresden plates, but she put them on the worst fabric imaginable. It was like buckram. It was hard, scratchy, ugly, so I picked them all off, but she had done such beautiful applique that it laid right back down, and I could just stitch it back down on nice ecology cloth. So this is her quilt, and she gets this when she gets married or I die. So that's it for the day. I thank you very much. And thank you all for helping.